It happens every year. Those players who were coming off great seasons, better than expected seasons, and going into the following year with high expectations from the fans and media, they suddenly fall off or didn't live up to the hype surrounding them. Then, of course, there are those players who played incredibly well in a contract year, got paid, and then they go back to their old ways. Or there are those perennial all-stars, big names that you always expect to come out and be top performers in the league, but Father Time starts catching up with them, and you see a sudden decline. And just like in the prior video where we talked about players whose stock I'm buying for this upcoming season, in this video we're going to be taking a look at players whose current stock is probably better off selling as we head into the season. As always, if you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, then be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a video, and in return I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, if you caught my last video, you already know the parameters for which I define a player's stock, but if you missed it, real quick, think of a player's stock like an actual company stock valued on the stock market. Some company stocks are overvalued relative to their earnings per share, and for some, the opposite. They're undervalued based on forward-looking growth and earnings potential. When looking at a player stock for the purposes of this video, it's the same thing. Every player has a perceived value based on their past season, their future potential, their current contract, etc. And while some players' values are currently low and set to exceed expectations for this upcoming season, there are also those players whose stock is a little too high, too overvalued, that it would be wise to sell on said player as they're likely to fall below expectations. Now, just because I have someone on this list doesn't mean I think that they're a bad player or that they're going to have a trash season. No, they could still be an all-star and put up 25 points per game, but it's more so falling below expectations relative to how their current value is set. And first up on the list of players in the stock that I'm selling, we're going to go with Jalen Brown. Now, I know some might say this is a little obvious, unless you're a Celtics fan, of course, but really for me, it's a matter of selling stock on this guy because of his contract. No one is denying that the dude can ball. He's an elite scorer and all-star, has proven to be an effective player on both ends of the floor, but we all know he's not a superstar. He's not a supermax contract level player, and he's not a guy that is going to be carrying a franchise like he's getting paid to do. And let's be real, when you can't dribble with your left hand and turning the ball over frequently because you're not as comfortable dribbling the ball with that hand, and it's impacted how you've shown up in the playoffs because players know this and they try to force you to go left, yeah, it puts things into perspective, and it's why I'm selling stock on Jalen Brown. Next on this list, and I'm probably going to get a little heat on this one even mentioning his name given he's one of the best players in the NBA, but that's part of the reason why I'm selling stock in him, because you want to sell while the player's stock is high, and that's Joel Embiid. Look, no one is denying, again, what an incredible player Embiid is. Yeah, some might get annoyed with his antics, and he hasn't had the best track record in the playoffs, but he's a top 5 player in the NBA, a dominant force when he's on the court, and the Sixers would be a lottery team without him, okay? He's special. He's one of the best basketball players in the world. Now, you can argue maybe he didn't deserve the MVP this season with the way Jokic played, but Embiid had a damn good season. Here's the thing, he's coming off an MVP year, the best season of his career. His value is at an all-time high, and while I still think Embiid will be great this year and dominate as we have seen in years past, I don't think it's going to be with the same vigor and motivation that we have seen before with everything going on around the Sixers. The situation with James Harden, who Embiid knows if they lost Harden, they're not going to be as good and likely don't have a shot to make it out of the East. And I know some will say, well, it all depends on what they get in return for James Harden. Do you know what his trade value is right now? With the kind of demands he's making, accusations he's making, wanting a max deal in his mid-30s, his trade value is so low that you'll be lucky to get a first-round pick for him. But for Embiid, most likely losing Harden, the team isn't getting any younger, Embiid isn't getting any younger, and I can see a world in which Embiid loses a little motivation, especially if some tension is created between himself and the front office. So I still think he'll have a great season. He's still going to be one of the better players in the league, but it's not going to be an MVP type year, which is why I'm selling his stock while it's high. Next on this list, I feel like most people will be in agreement on this one, is Bruce Brown. What's funny is that Bruce Brown was an underrated player before this past season, and then he gets traded to the Nuggets, becomes a huge piece in that title run, and now everyone's talking about him, and he gets a big 2-year contract from the Pacers for which he's going to be making over $20 million a year. For Bruce Brown, I like his game, and again, he was critical for the Nuggets in their title. But when you come off a season like that and everyone is talking about you and the teams are all after you in free agency and you get paid well over your value, then yeah, I'm selling when your value is at its peak in a player's career. Next on this list, I've got Domantas Sabonis, another great player, still going to be a productive and impactful player this season, but I don't see him replicating the kind of season he had last year where he was an all-star. Sabonis last season was arguably a top 5 big man in the league. And it helped given the fact that his team was one of the best in the Western Conference with him being the second option. But we've actually seen this from Sabonis before, where he makes an all-star team, and even when he did make it as an all-star, you probably would consider him to be more of a lower tier level all-star, but then would follow that up still with a good season, but it wasn't even close to being all-star worthy. Now, I think his overall fit on the Kings is certainly better than anything that he's had in the past with both the Pacers and the Thunder, and with the rise of De'Aaron Fox playing alongside him, an actual competent point guard is going to do wonders for him, and maybe that'll prove me wrong. But for this upcoming season, I don't see Sabonis being as dominant as we saw last year. And talking about him and De'Aaron Fox is this incredible underdog story that the Kings lighting the beam and making it to the playoffs for the first time in over 15 years, all of that. So another instance of a player whose stock is a little too high, and I'm going to sell. Next on this list, I'm actually going to be combining two players into one because they play for the same team. And that's Draymond Green and Klay Thompson. Now, I know some will say, well, is their stock really that high right now? Especially Klay Thompson, as a lot of people have seen, he's really not the same Klay he used to be. Not as good of a defender, not as efficient of a scorer, not as quick and athletic and moving around screens and getting to a spot to get open on the catch and shoot. Well, the fact of the matter is, it's still Klay Thompson and also Draymond Green, who for one are still getting paid like all-stars. Draymond getting a big $100 million extension at his age, which I've said before will be regrettable for the Warriors. And then for Klay Thompson, it's still Klay Thompson and Draymond Green in the sense that they'll still be viewed by most as game-changing type players, the best players on a Warriors dynasty team. Like, their value is always going to be higher than it should be by nature of who they are, what team they play for, and what player they play alongside with in Steph Curry. But I'm selling on these guys partially because we've already seen them start to decline. They're both on the wrong side of 30, and I don't see a world in which we're going to see the same level of impact both of these players have brought in the past because of their more recent inconsistent play. I'm not saying they're just going to completely fall off this season and be borderline unplayable, but I foresee a down year for both of them, and with their stock still being high, I'm going to sell on these guys. Next on this list, I've got Austin Reaves. Now, this might seem a little odd because I had expressed before on the channel, I actually think Reeves' contract extension from the Lakers was a bargain deal, especially when you consider the fact that there were reports that he was going to be commanding north of $90 million. And I actually think this contract of his will age well over time, given he's still young and is about to enter his prime. But man, Austin Reeves, one of the most talked about and hyped players from last season, when yes, he had a great season and it's an incredible success story when you think about his path coming to the NBA, being an undrafted player, had to work his way up through the G League to get an NBA contract, and now he's a legit NBA rotational player. But that aside, when you look at it purely from a basketball talent perspective and comparing him against his peers, you would think the way that we talk about him is as if he's an all-star or an all-star in the making. And I actually like Reeves' game. Dude hustles, never quits on a play, has developed a nice offensive game, but he's a role player. And he's not going to be anything more than a role player, in my opinion. And while I think the Lakers retaining Reeves is actually going to be great for them, when it comes to selling high on a player's stock, I don't see how you can't sell on Reeves going into the season, especially after the man got paid. Next on this list, I've got Jimmy Butler. Look, we all know Jimmy is a dog on the court, one of the hardest working players out there in the game, great on both sides of the ball, shows up when it matters most. I love Jimmy, and it still pains me that the Bulls traded him. But Jimmy's stock, after going to the finals last season, having that incredible playoff run, carrying the heat on his back, coming up big in late game situations, yeah, you're talking about a player whose stock is at an all-time high. And we all know Jimmy is going to keep doing his thing. He's never going to stop working hard or take nights off, not fight on every possession. But at Butler's age, he's about to turn 35. He's going into his 13th season. With the mileage under his belt, I do think we'll start to see Jimmy's game drop off a little bit, especially when it comes to his speed and attacking ability inside. He does rely on his athleticism quite a bit, and with age, that will eventually catch up to you. He's still going to be an all-star caliber player, but I think this season is where we'll start to see Jimmy slide a bit, and with the stock being this high, it's a good time to sell. The final person I have on this list, and this one I'm kind of grappling with because in reality you could say this person's value is actually pretty low based on his performance last season. But then when you saw the kind of contract he received this summer and with all the media attention around him, you think, okay, maybe a good time to sell on this player, and that's Dillon Brooks. I mean, forget the antics aside. He's a dirty player. Literally trash-talked his way to relevance in the NBA. He thinks he's a lot better than he actually is, but he's a liability on offense with how inefficient he's been from the field, and was borderline unplayable in that series against the Lakers in the playoffs. But for some reason, you still have people out here talking about Dillon Brooks and how tenacious of a defender he is, how hard of a worker he is, how you need someone with his kind of mentality and a dog-like mentality on the court. It's why the Rockets paid him $80 million. And given what we know about Brooks, how he was kind of riding the trash talk train on a team that was good and with the superstar, let's see how he does on an irrelevant team, a team that is fairly dysfunctional and going to be one of the worst in the league. And when the media isn't going to be putting a spotlight on you, what's going to happen? So while you could argue that his value currently is low, I still think it's way too high for the caliber of player that he is, and it's why I'm selling on Dillon Brooks. I would love to hear what you guys think, though. Who are you selling on this season? Let me know if you agree or disagree with any of the players I mentioned. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.